What up, y'all? This is Patrick Hayes, and today what I want to talk about is spiritual vampirism. So, spiritual seduction, spiritual predators, and how spiritual predators vamp on people, how this works, and what we can do about that. So, the way I like to kind of crack into this is starting by explaining what seduction in itself is in the typical understanding of seduction. So when we think of seduction, and what I mean by this is like sexual seduction, it's basically, you can imagine the archetype of like the sexy mistress or the womanizer man, and how the sexy mistress or the womanizer man will use their sexual prowess to hypnotize or pull into their trap a partner of the opposite sex that does not actually want to be involved sexually with them. Right? So, in a sense, their higher chakras, meaning their heart, their mind, is maybe they have a significant other, or maybe they're not interested sexually in this other person. But due to this person's ability to wield their sexual powers and use their sexual magnetism, they can suck them in and basically convince them to go against what their higher chakras are telling them. So this person then that's being seduced is split. They're split because their mind and their heart, their higher chakras, their higher centers, doesn't want to be involved sexually. Maybe, like I said, they have a significant other or whatnot. But they're so entranced or so hypnotized through their lower chakras that they can't say no. So therefore, they end up having sex, and then they end up regretting it, right? Because there's a conflict. It's not coherent, or it's not fully congruent, because their higher chakras are out of balance with their lower chakras, right? So this is essentially the same thing that's happening in one of the most common forms of spiritual seduction or spiritual predation, if that's even a word. And how that works is, it's the same thing, but it's reversed. So how this works is, a spiritual predator will use the higher chakras to seduce people, while at the same time, from the lower chakras, stealing energy. So it works kind of like, if you can imagine, a blinding light. They can use spiritual truths, real truths, and they can transmit those truths through the third eye, from the crown, from the heart, and put out a beautiful energy field. And then while that energy field starts attracting people, when the people come in, they can basically do like a little switch move and start tapping or cording the lower chakras. So it'd be like the solar plexus, or the root, or the sexual chakra, the belly button, and feeding off that energy. You see this a lot with spiritual teachers that will demoralize or disempower their students by creating a really strong separation between them and the student, to where they'll give these spiritual truths and they'll light people up on the higher chakras, and that acts like a magnet, where people are like, wow, this is amazing, this is truth, and they recognize it as truth. And the spiritual teacher will create a kind of hierarchy, or make them feel small, and tap their solar plexus and basically take their power. See, it's really common for people when they start studying spirituality to come to this conclusion that if somebody has spiritual truth, if somebody has divine knowledge, that means that this person is completely benevolent and in complete service to others. Or that's not true. You can still attain spiritual knowledge and spiritual truths while having a service to self kind of orientation, or while actually having somewhat malevolent intentions. But very commonly what happens is that people may be initiated into some sort of higher spiritual order, but they might get mixed up with some interdimensional beings that decide to use that person as kind of like a louche funnel, or a vampiric funnel. And what will happen is they'll be endowed with certain truths, and then they unknowingly start working with these beings, or sometimes even knowingly, and these beings can kind of help them by giving them more spiritual intuitions, or giving them more psychic abilities. But essentially what they're doing is they're using that person as a funnel. So they make that person either highly triggering or highly stimulating in a certain way that gets other people around them to give their power, give their energy up. And then they feed off of that energy while giving the person a little bit of that energy too. So that person basically is being empowered to a certain degree. It's not real empowerment, but they're feeding off the energy themselves. But ultimately, the majority of the energy that they're creating to feed off of is going to these other beings. So it's kind of like a dark alliance, you could think of it. And how it works is our chakras can be either activated or they can be kind of reverse activated, like inverted in a sense. And so from the energy that we're pulling in or the energy that we're generating, right? So if we're pulling in energy from other people and we are sending that energy down to the lower chakras or the underworld, then basically we're like a vampire. Now, if you're not a vampire, the opposite of that is somebody that's activated their chakras, where they perceive the energies through their chakras, but they're not courting or pulling energy from other people. In fact, they're radiating energy, so they're giving energy. And if we have an inverted chakra, it's like a reverse activated chakra. And so a lot of these spiritual vampire spiritual teachers have inverted chakras that are tapping other people's chakra sources and then sucking their energy away. They're feeding off of themselves and they're sending it to other beings. And a really good way of being able to see whether this is happening or feel whether this is happening is feeling into your lower chakras. So a good red flag is if there's a spiritual truth that feels very good on one level, but has kind of like an incongruence where you feel some sort of like a hole in your solar plexus, or you're feeling ungrounded or unempowered, or you're feeling like a disruption, like it makes sense on this level, but something's not quite right. I don't know what that is. This is a good intuition to follow, because what this is saying is that your lower chakras are telling you something's out of balance because they're being manipulated or they're being fed off of. And so even though something can align perfectly mentally, can align perfectly intuitively in like the third eye sense, you can feel your crown energy, or you can even feel the heart energy. If your lower chakras are telling you something, if you're feeling holes in some of your lower chakras, or you're feeling maybe really disempowered around this person, or when you listen to the lectures or whatever it is, you might feel activated on one sense, but it might make you feel like disempowered, like you're smaller, or that this person is the savior, or this person is the one with all the power and you need to kind of give yourself over to this person. That's a major red flag. Now, with that said, it's really important to be careful. This doesn't mean that you just blame somebody else every time you feel disempowered. This doesn't mean that it's always someone else's fault when you feel a hole in your solar plexus, or you feel ungrounded, or your lower chakras are creating a feeling of unease. This is not an excuse to just blame other people. This is just something to be aware of, because there are a lot of false gurus running around, and a lot of energy vampires, on a lower level than being just a false guru, that are tapping energy sources. And this is something that is really common. Something that, you don't need to be a spiritual teacher or spiritual guru to be doing this. In fact, most people do it to a certain degree because that's just kind of the order of things in the 3D world. But like I said, it's really important to not start blaming other people for it, because ultimately, if your energy is being tapped, ultimately, this is your responsibility. So ultimately, the only people that can create an invulnerability to being energetically vamped or manipulated is us. We're the only people that can really radiate and activate our chakras so that they can't be vamped. In fact, when we have a truly activated lower three chakras, they can't be penetrated and they can't be courted because they're truly activated, meaning that energy is, our energy is vibrating too strong for the cord to get in there. It just bounces right off, right? So it's really important that while it's good to be able to recognize if a spiritual teacher is a vamper, and to avoid that, ultimately, what's most important is for us to activate ourselves. So to learn how we may be being a vampire in a certain sense, and we may be feeding off other people's energies, and we may be concaving our chakras, which leaves us susceptible to other beings feeding off of us. So when we actually learn to activate our field and fully be in balance, we become immune to that. Then eventually we can be in the fields of energy vampers and on an energetic level be like a teacher or an example of how they could shift to feeding themselves, because that's ultimately what it is. When you can feed yourself by connecting to source, by connecting to our true greater power, then we don't need to tap other resources for energy. It's basically the idea of free energy in the planet or digging for oil, right? Digging for oil is like sucking. It's a parasitic kind of action, where free energy is like tapping into the source, this abundant, infinite source of energy, and operating off of that. So I encourage you to look around, be aware of when things are incongruent. Don't turn yourself over to the idea that just because somebody has a spiritual truth, that means they've come to the conclusion or that they're in alignment with being fully in service to others. Be aware of your lower chakras, and be aware when you're getting a transmission of higher dimensional truth. Be aware of your lower chakras and how they feel, and whether there's something else going on. Don't fall for the, oh, look over here while we pick your pocket move, because that's a really common thing that's going on in the spiritual world right now. And also be sure not to blame other people. This all comes back to us. Ultimately, it's all about cultivating yourself. This is what will keep you immune, and it really doesn't do any good to try to blame other people or to try to, like go to the vampire and be like, hey, you're possessed by beings and you're stealing people's energy. The only time in which that would actually be appropriate is if that person was really open to it. Like if you had a deep relationship with them and they're open to this esoteric idea, and they're somebody that they would actually listen to you and maybe take it seriously, then in a non-accusational kind of way, you can have a conversation like that with that person if you think that they might be willing to receive that. Otherwise, it's just going to stir things up. There's going to be denial, and it's probably not a good idea. So what it's more important to do is focus on yourself, focus on your own cultivation. So thanks so much for tuning in. This is Patrick Hayes. Like, subscribe, share with your friends, and I'll talk to you guys next time. One love. If you liked the video you just saw and you want to support me in bringing more content like that to you, donate to my Patreon page. There's a link pinned in the comments below, and when you donate to the page, you get access to all sorts of cool giveaways like exclusive content, free music downloads, monthly group chats with me, and more. Now, every single donation that comes in goes directly to improving the quality and the quantity of my content. So thanks so much for your support, and I'll see you on the flip side.